For the fourth time in 2 weeks, we are coming at you from the CBB Central podcast. 2 podcasts a week means that we're getting closer and closer to the college basketball season. We're less than a month away, Brad, but most of the discussion right now in the hoops landscape isn't about this upcoming season that we know will kind of maintain some incredible storylines. It's been kind of this FBI investigation. And I mean, how have you been just kind of taking all of this stuff into kind of your – I mean, it's really interesting for me trying to like balance what I'm like hearing and like what's going on in these trials. I mean, I'm not at the trial, so I can't really say. I mean, how are you kind of weighting all of this discussion of guys like Silvio D'Souza, Billy Preston, Dennis Smith, DeAndre Ayton potentially getting paid? I know that's been the big kind of development this week, thanks to the testimony of TJ Gassnola, who is a Adidas quote unquote bag man, has worked in the AAU circuit for many years. So. Just been a really weird week of college basketball discussion, and kind of interested to break it down with you before we get into the American Conference.
Yeah, so I'm just interested to see kind of how these testimonies, how this kind of one-sided accounts of the stories kind of factor into like how we're gonna, like if teams are gonna be postseason banned or lose scholarships, whatever. I'm having a hard time figuring out, and maybe it's because the NCAA doesn't even know how they're going to do it. But like, TJ Gassnola says X about Silvio D'Souza. Does that mean that D'Souza will definitely be ineligible, or does that just mean that that's is this any more than unsubstantiated rumor at this point? Like, even if guys get implicated, will there necessarily be repercussions? That's like the main thing I'm interested in. Then I'm also kind of disappointed that we haven't gotten too many new players brought in. I'm trying to think, and I think everyone who we knew of their involvement before the trial, I don't think any like new big time players have really been brought in, at least not that I've seen or can recall off the top of my head. So I was hoping maybe we'll get another bombshell about a big name player or something, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah, I think the ripple effects can be really interesting. I think it was Sam Vecini who pointed out that Bruno Fernando and Silvio D'Souza have the same guardian, and if a Maryland booster was paying the guardian of a player that was at Maryland, it wouldn't necessarily matter that Silvio D'Souza didn't wind up at Maryland, that it still could kind of impact Bruno Fernando's eligibility, which is always interesting. I don't know how that'll transpire. I think the best part of this whole thing today, at least, was Silvio D'Souza taking the bribe from the Maryland booster and then had to pay it back because he decided to go to Kansas, which I don't totally understand given his like good friend Bruno Fernando plays at Maryland and he was getting less money to go to Kansas by all accounts. But like, I don't know. It's kind of weird to weave your way through these stories because it's obviously not all a money decision with these recruits, because there have been guys getting paid, small amounts of money, big amounts of money, less money from some schools than others. I don't fully understand the whole scope of it. And I think the other thing I wanted to point out to you, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but I do think it's kind of fishy that Brian Bowen Sr. all of a sudden just couldn't remember when it came to all the Nike schools, especially Oregon. All of a sudden he couldn't remember anything about that, but he remembered specific details of what Creighton said and what Oklahoma State said, which were both Nike schools, but much smaller schools. Oregon, Texas, he seemed to just do not recall anything. I mean, it is very fascinating, and I kind of brought this up with someone who's been following the trial incredibly closely. At first, he thought, no way, but after kind of reviewing some transcript, he said he did think it was a bit odd. So that's one of the things I've just been kind of watching. I think it's weird. I don't know how we prove whether there's any, hush money or et cetera going down, but I do think it was something that caught my eye.
I could definitely see it. I've been watching The Sopranos for my third time through recently, so I'm very very aware of trying to like buy a juror, like flip a juror, or kind of have some underhanded tactics. And with this with this much at stake, with millions and millions of dollars and careers and these big programs on the line, I don't see why there wouldn't be any fishy happenings going on.
Yeah, and I will just kind of generally say that I think it's weird that there's been no talk of Bill Self really getting punished or in trouble. I think partially because Gasnola said that Bill Self didn't know, but I mean, Bill Self was dealing very frequently with this guy, as it is made to sound, at least by Gasnola's testimony, and that they're discussing recruits. Wink, wink. We'll see what happens. I don't think Bill Self would ever get fired at Kansas unless he's literally forced out by the NCAA. I just don't think Kansas, in the climate that we're in right now, where I don't think people see what Bill Self is doing as abhorrently wrong. I don't necessarily see them trying to pull the trigger on, making his exit speed up in any way, despite maybe some misconduct that he may or may not have committed, may or may not have known about. There's just enough plausible deniability for him.
Yeah, and with all this plausible deniability, I am very unsure about how many or how this trial will affect the coaching carousel, or which teams are going to be ineligible for the postseason. From a fan's perspective, no one should hope that any team is banned from the postseason. You want the best teams to be in the NCAA tournament. It doesn't make sense to want otherwise. I get maybe if you it was mid-February and your team's in the bubble, then maybe you're hoping that an Oregon or a Kansas gets pulled and allows for another at-large spot. But at this point, as a national college basketball fan who wants to watch the most entertaining NCAA tournament possible, I don't see why it feels like people are hoping that teams are going to get the death penalty or get banned. I don't know why you would hope that. It seems like very short-term rationalization there.
I think, just generally, I think fans enjoy watching other teams crumble, and fans also enjoy the possibility of, let's say I'm a Oregon fan who hasn't really been implicated in this because because Brian Bowen Sr. doesn't recall anything, and I know I'm going to be going up against Kansas for X recruit. I think I might be rooting for Bill Self to get fired or Kansas to miss the postseason for a year or two, just so that I can win that recruit. I don't know if that's good for college basketball. I think your fanhood does kind of step in the way there.
No, I agree 100%. I could maybe see with the recruiting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the recruit won't go, to the school still. If it's only a 1-year postseason ban, I wouldn't expect that to scare off too many recruits. It could scare off people who are on the team currently, because what happened with UConn a few years ago, with Alex Oriaki and Roscoe Smith, where they could UConn was facing the postseason ban. I think Smith might have had to sit out a year, but because it was Oriaki's last year, he could play right away at Missouri instead of be a graduate when he had not graduated, so he wasn't a graduate transfer.
Yeah, that's an excellent call. I think that's definitely something we'll have to watch as potential sanctions do come down. Anything else on the FBI investigation into college basketball before we move on to the American Conference preview?
Nope. I think we should move on. Talk about one of the more interesting conferences in college basketball.
Yes, indeed. The American Conference last year get 3 bids to the NCAA tournament. Cincinnati, Houston, and Wichita State all dance. Wichita State bounced in the first round, Cincinnati and Houston in the second round. But there's a lot of turnover in this league. The 2 headlines of the offseason, UConn making a big splash with Dan Hurley coming in as their new head coach over Kevin Ollie. Memphis bringing in Penny Hardaway to revamp their basketball program. And then Cincinnati and Wichita State both rebuilding with younger rosters than they've had in the past. It's just super wide open league, so I'm excited to get into it. First team we will touch on, since we will go in order by what they did last season. Cincinnati, they went 16-2 in the American last year, 31-5 overall before that gut-wrenching loss to Nevada that they gave away late in the game after being up by, I believe, 20 at one point. they lose Jacob Evans, they lose Gary Clark, two incredibly important players, along with Kyle Washington, who is pretty solid in the post. They do bring back Jerron Cumberland, Kane Broome, Justin Jennifer, and they bring back the defense that they will continue to maintain. They don't have necessarily a recruiting class that will jump off the page at you. They do bring in a good JUCO transfer in Rashawn Fredericks, who should play right away. Also maybe see some minutes from Logan Johnson, who's a freshman combo guard out of California. But this team just doesn't, on paper, to me, have a ton of scoring upside beyond Jerron Cumberland. I don't know if he's a guy I want as my first option offensively.
No, I agree 100%. And I think one of the more interesting parts of Cincinnati's profile for this upcoming season was, last year point guard was really their biggest weakness. A lot of people were hyping up Kane Broome coming into the year. He for the most part was a disappointment. It also kind of showed in that Cincinnati-Nevada game down the stretch. They were having a hard time getting good looks. I know Broome and Jennifer both had some costly mistakes down the stretch. But now, maybe they start together. The Jennifer and Broome backcourt. That was one last year where they were rarely, if at all, on the court at the same time. And that's something that we had talked on a lot, where it's a good thing to play two point guards. Like that's a positive. When you play two different point guards and have them split the position, that's usually a sign that your point guard position is in trouble a little bit. So I think it could be interesting if the two play together this year. It'll be a very small backcourt, but that's kind of the most interesting part to me, is to see how they kind of handle the role increase and the role adjustment there.
Yeah, I will generally say I'm not a fan of a Jennifer Broome backcourt from the size standpoint. Jennifer was solid last year. I think he might actually be the better option at point guard for them. Takes care of the ball better than Broome. Broome's really kind of that undersized two guard who wants the ball in his hands and is useful in that 15 to 20, maybe even 25 minutes a game role where he can come off the bench, give you a spark. But I don't necessarily see him as a starting point guard. I think I would start Jennifer, bring Broome off the bench. But I think you could see that lineup for maybe 10 minutes a game with 2 point guards. Also, I think Jerron Cumberland's going to have a pretty good year. I'm pretty excited about Keith Williams as well from Brooklyn. Was a pretty good recruit out of high school. Was solid last year, up and down though. And then had a pretty good international trip up to Canada where the Bearcats went, I believe, 2-1. So they're gonna lose a lot on the glass between Washington and Gary Clark, along with Jacob Evans, who is a terrific rebounder. So I'm concerned about that. I don't have this team winning the conference. I know Mick Cronin's done a really good job. They're going to be great on defense, even if they go small. But just to me, I don't see this as a conference winning roster. I think if you're picking them, you're just down on the teams with more upside and just betting on a team that you think might be the safest bet to make the NCAA tournament this season, which Cincinnati I think might be.
In regards to a Broome and kind of his fit in the backcourt, this Cincinnati team does look like they're a little short on scoring. So maybe even though Jennifer is kind of like the more natural point guard and like the better facilitator, Broome could provide that necessary secondary score next to Jerron Cumberland, who I think will have a great year too. And then in regards to Keith Williams, he's like a prototypical Cincinnati wing. He doesn't shoot it exceptionally well, but he's very tough, very physical. He's going to see a definite increase in terms of his usage. And then in terms of just the Cincinnati team overall, I also do not have them winning the league. But this is a team that I think the more that I look, just kind of at how the pieces fit together here, the more I'm starting to like them. I've slowly moved them up from 4 to 3, and now I have them at second in the American Conference. I just really like a lot of these multi-positional wings that they have. And I think guys like Trey Scott and Alil Nazemi and Rashawn Fredericks, well, Scott and Nazemi were there last year. And the fact that they didn't play a lot could have been more of an indication that they were stuck behind Clark and Washington. Now with them gone, I think that they could really take a step forward. And then Fredericks, the JUCO transfer that you touched on earlier. Gives them just another guy who can play, the 3 or the 4. Give them a lot of versatility and athleticism in the front court.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is the kind of the safest bet to be a good team this year. I would say they're the safest bet in the conference to be a top 40 team, but I don't see the top 25 hype that I've seen from some people. I don't know if they're getting votes in the composite, Brad. I think that'd be a good time to bring that in, because I feel like they're getting a little overrated just because they've been good in the past, but because I'm not in love with the roster, but they're not. I know they won't be bad, and in a league where there's so many question marks, that's valuable to me.
Yeah, I mean, I always hate the logic of well, this team is always good, so they'll be good again this year, even when they lose so much. We saw that last year with Wisconsin and Iowa State, especially, where that was the kind of the company line that a lot of people used, had them in projected NCAA tournament brackets, and then they were not very close. And people do have Cincinnati in the top 25 in terms of exactly who. Let's see. 2 people. Kyle Kensing has them 22nd. Mike DeCourcy has them 23rd. I do not see how you can rank this team in the top 25.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty massive bet on Jerron Cumberland becoming like the best player in the conference, which I just don't see.
I think that he could be the best player in the conference, but I still don't think that necessarily makes them, a top 25 team. I mean, he could average, 17, 18 points a game. But the issue is not with Cumberland. I mean, the issue is that secondary score, the kind of whole Broom Jennifer dynamic, and then just needing these former reserves and or newcomers to kind of step in and fill these the massive void that's left by losing Evans, Clark, and Washington.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think they would need. I think honestly, if they're top 25, they need Cumberland to be like that special, as you said, and get all of those questions answered, as you said. Let's move on to Houston. Let's move on to Houston. Houston, another hugely successful year. Talking under Kelvin Sampson, they finally break through, make the NCAA tournament. 27 wins on the year, 14 in the American Conference, and they had that Michigan team that went to the national championship game beat until that Jordan Poole buzzer beater. They lose Rob Gray, who was pretty much everything to their offense in terms of his ability to score at all 3 levels, shoot the ball, handle the ball. But they bring back a fair amount of talent. They've recruited well. They go into a new arena this year, which should be exciting for their fan base. Corey Davis will be a pretty huge player for them, as well as Armani Brooks. Both have significant upside, along with guys like Galen Robinson will factor in the backcourt. DeJon Giroux, the UMass transfer, has gotten pretty strong reviews as well. Front court has some questions, but some talent as well. This is the team I'm pretty big on. I think there's a case to be made that this is the favorite going into the season.
Yeah, I think that you can absolutely make that case. I mean, they have veterans. They have guys who played pretty significant roles last season, and they're also not filling the void that Rob Gray left with and Devin Davis too, with a single player. But I think that this is an extremely deep team that has a very strong top 9 on paper. I think one of the most interesting things about this team is that they could play with multiple ball handlers, like a potential starting lineup of Robinson, Corey Davis, and DeJon Giroux. I mean, Davis is a knockdown shooter, and then Robinson and Giroux are very good creators and can kind of facilitate, and Giroux can also create his own shot. And then that doesn't even include guys like Armani Brooks, who should be one of the best 6 men in the country. If he comes off the bench, he can easily start. And then Nate Hinton, too, who's a top 100, kind of a big point guard type. So this team is very deep. They have a lot of guys who can create offense, and I think that's a very appealing trait of this Houston team.
Yeah, we kind of discussed at times our favorite archetypes, and I've always been a fan of the big point guard who can defend 1 through 3 and play one and score offensively, but also pass. and they have two of those in Nate Hinton and DeJon Jarreau. I think Jarreau's a little bit more ready to score at the college level than Hinton is, but Hinton can be that kind of Swiss Army knife type player. He's really talented. So I'm really excited to see how Kelvin Sampson works out everything in this backcourt. And then, I mean, up front, what do you see kind of working out in the rotation? Because I think Bryson Gresham's an interesting character. Transferred with Jarreau from UMass via JUCO. He's a guy who is pretty highly touted out of high school. Didn't really put it together at UMass, but they don't have a ton of options up there. They've got guys like Braden Brady, who played some minutes last year, averaged 4 and 4. Chris Harris was pretty unproductive. So I don't really know how you see this front court shaking out.
So I think that this team is really missing that guy who's like a 3 who can also play the 4. We talked about this with Florida a lot. You know, it's kind of a piece that everyone needs, and there's just not enough of them. So I mean, maybe when they go small, a guy like DeJon Jarreau can play like a small ball 4. I mean, that'll be very small, very offensive-centric lineup. They are kind of missing that 3-4. So I think Fabian White starts at the 4, Brady at the 5. I think Gresham will come off the bench to back up Brady. And then there is a pretty nice opportunity there for Cedric Alley, who missed last season with a hip injury. He's like a 6'5" power forward, kind of like an undersized but strong, like a physical type. There's an opportunity for him to get some minutes here off the bench. I think if, the guy who they have sitting out for this year, Justin Gorham, if they can magically pull a waiver out of thin air like many of these teams are doing, I think he'd be a great fit to come off the bench at that kind of 3-4 spot.
Yeah, I will kind of rain on the parade of Justin Gorham getting a waiver just because he's from the Baltimore area and left Towson to go play in Houston.
He could have a sick aunt in Houston or something.
You never know. You never know. But I definitely wouldn't count on that one, but it would be a big addition if that is possible. We haven't really heard too much. Oh, but yeah, I do kind of like the idea of them going small. I don't think the American has a ton of great bigs. Just generally, I think it's a guards league this year, so they should have some opportunities to do that should they want to. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very good team. I think it's a top 40 team. I think it's an NCAA tournament team. I think I'm a little concerned because I don't know that they have a go-to scorer. I think they have a bunch of guys who can get a bucket, but I will be interested to see who's the guy who goes and gets things done late in games when they don't have Rob Gray.
Absolutely. I think depth is his team's major strength, and then what you just touched on, that lack of like a clear go-to guy. Corey Davis looks like he would be the clear leading scorer, but he was someone who was more used as like a shooter running off screens. So maybe it's DeJon Jarreau at that spot. Kevin, where do you have Houston in the American?
I have them second behind UCF.
Okay, I have them third. Seems like every day I flip-flop Cincinnati and Houston. And I don't know if we gave our national ranking for Cincinnati. I had Cincinnati 43rd nationally, and I have Houston 45th nationally. So very close together. And that means that both of them would be sneaking into the NCAA tournament. Houston would be one of the last 4 in.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right to me. I think that's where a lot of these American teams will kind of slot in, which is what's going to make this league so interesting. Moving on to our third team of the day, that will be Wichita State. Wichita State is an almost entirely new look roster. Landry Shamet gone, Shaq Morris, Darrell Willis, Frank Camp, Austin Reeves transferred out of the program unexpectedly. Even guys like Rashard Kelly and Zach Brown, who were role players, transfer out or graduate from the program. Greg Marshall really has a lot of work to do with a young roster, but he has an incredibly talented recruiting class, probably the best class they've had, despite losing Alex Lomax, who is a early signing and now headed to Memphis. They have some really intriguing prospects coming in, though, both from JUCO and from from the prep circuit. They have They go. It's really a class. There's a lot of size in it, a lot of wings as well. They have guys like Chance Moore, Jamarius Burton, Roderick Brown, all big wings who can make a lot of plays. And they have 3 listed centers in the class. And then there's also been a lot of hype about Dexter Dennis, who's unranked by 24/7, but there's been a lot of like preseason discussion about him, so I'm excited to see what he can do. But it's really just a new group plus Marcus McDuffie, and I think that's where kind of the discussion has to begin.
Yeah, so I think when you break down the American, right, there's a top 8, and for me, this Wichita State has so many new pieces. So many guys who are unproven. Marcus McDuffie is the only guy on this team who's been a consistent rotation piece on a Division I team. Because I don't think any of their JUCO guys were previous Division I guys. I'm not 100% sure on that. But with that much roster turnover and inexperience, I think you got to put Wichita State as that 8th team in that top 8. Now, it would not totally shock me if guys like Ricky Torres or like Dexter Dennis, like you mentioned, kind of emerge as strong starters, and Wichita State, with Greg Marshall as the coach, maybe climb up to 3rd or 4th, sneak back into the NCAA tournament. But I think at this stage, with all the unknowns and kind of the other 7 teams in that top 8, I think have a lot more reason for optimism based on their roster than Wichita State.
Yeah, I will say I have them 7th. I have them ahead of Tulsa. That might change, but I mean, in my published written preview, I have them 7. I think, I guess I'm interested in your take on Marcus McDuffie and what you think he'll bring this season, because McDuffie's a guy who came in with so much luster as this high-level recruit out of high school. This significant pull to go into a prep powerhouse in St. Anthony's in New Jersey and land a kid to come out to Wichita, Kansas. And to me, I've just never seen it. I think he's like a switchable defender, very athletic, but just never really shown me what I've wanted to see from him as a scorer, never really that leadership. He's just been kind of like a very good rotation player. I mean, even his quote-unquote very good sophomore year that a lot of people talk about, he averaged 11 points, 5.5 rebounds, and shot 35% from 3 in 25 minutes a night. That's a good player, but it's not – I don't think it's an option number 1 on a really good team. So, I mean, to me, it all comes down to what he can bring to the table this season, and then obviously this incoming group that is so talented.
Yeah, I agree 100% on Marcus McDuffie, just because I think he's more a prospect than player. Guys like him. I mean, you talked about with Houston, they were sorely missing that guy who can play the 3 and the 4. McDuffie is that. I disagree 100% with you though that he's not a number 1 option. I think he's a good like secondary or a 3rd option. But he's the type of player who maybe he has a disappointing senior year this year. Averages maybe like 10 or 11 points a game again, while like people think he's going to take that next jump. But then he finds himself on like a 2-way contract in the NBA or something, just because he is a valuable, I guess, package. He has some really nice skills there, but I just don't think that he takes that step forward this year.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And before we move on from Wichita State, just pick one of their newcomers that you're most excited to see. You think it's going to make a big impact this year. I think mine's going to be Dexter Dennis, but I don't know I'm interested to see your thoughts.
I'll go with Ricky Torres. I think he and Samaje Haynes-Jones should be the starting backcourt. I mean, they're the most experienced guys. I can see Dennis slotting in at that 3 spot, but if Torres gets the keys to the starting point guard position, I think he could put up some solid numbers in his first year at Wichita.
And so I have them 7th. You have them 8th in the American. That's going to be kind of a shocker for Wichita State fans. No pun intended, but I think until they prove it with this young group, it's just going to take time. I mean, they have the talent to be a top 4 team. They just haven't done it yet, and it's really tough given how young they'll be to expect more than that at this point.
I mean, I don't know if they have top 4 talent right now. I mean, maybe next year, only losing Marcus McDuffie, I think then maybe we're talking about a team that could rise to the top again. But I mean, most of these recruits are promising long-term guys, but I think the highest rated was Morris Udeze, who was like borderline top 150. I know a Jamarius Burton was a late stock riser, so maybe he can outperform. But I think Stevenson and Moore were kind of in that, 200 to 250 range in Chandler as well. So I think that this is a very, very strong long-term class, especially, 4 or 5 guys as they kind of grow together. I think that they could be really impactful later in their careers, but could have a steeper learning curve as freshmen.
Completely agree. Let's move on to Tulsa, who just kind of hung around all of last season, where I would guess I would best describe them as a pain in opponents' necks. I mean, they weren't ever really an NCAA tournament contender, but they won 12 American Conference games, and they've got some fairly intriguing pieces back. They lose Junior Ichu, who is very valuable, a 15-8 guy down in the post. But Sterling Taplin's back. Martin Zigbanu and Daquan Jeffries both had pretty impressive seasons last year. They're back as they're back. Igbanu more of a front court guy. Jeffries that kind of a combo forward. And then they also do add a transfer that should impact things in Jariah Horn from Nebraska, as well as a pretty impressive group of JUCO players. They don't have a single freshman coming into the program, so this will be a veteran team. Even if they don't have a ton of D1 experience, they'll have a lot of just overall. I don't know if it would be depth would be the right word, but overall game ready players. They should be looking at between these 7 sophomores, 4 juniors, and 2 seniors in Taplin and Daquan Jeffries. Brad, your kind of thoughts on this Tulsa team that is flying under the radar so far?
So I have them as a clear 9th. I think that, I mentioned earlier that top 8, and then I think Tulsa is the clear 9, and then got the 3 bottom feeders below them. But, this team just, they should be solid, borderline top 100 maybe. I just don't really see their talent on the same level. And, as the previously mentioned upper tier, and then, Tulsa has had very talented teams in the past and kind of underperformed with them. I think that's been kind of a characteristic of Frank Haith throughout his career. So I think that they're a little down on talent, and they don't have the coach like a Greg Marshall or a Mick Cronin, where maybe you give them the benefit of the doubt and kind of project guys to take a major step forward.
I think it's interesting. I have Tulsa as part of that 18 core, and then Temple is my 9. Just because I'm just pretty down on the rest of the Temple roster, beyond Quentin Rose. But I mean, it's interesting. Actually, I'm just so wrong. I have Tulsa at 9. I'm just misreading my rankings right now. I mean, it's pretty 50-50 to me between Temple and Tulsa. I don't think the gap is all that significant at all. I think Quentin Rose is really good. I think this kind of core of these combo forwards and Jariah Horn and Daquan Jeffries that I like, as well as Igbanu to step in up front. And Taplin's a good lead guard. I think they have more depth. I think they have more depth than Temple. I just think Temple has a better top player, so they might get the nod preseason, but it's going to be pretty tight there.
I'm actually very high on Temple coming into this year. Quentin Rose is one of my favorite players in the country. I remember watching him on like a Wednesday or Thursday afternoon game in their preseason tournament or their in-season tournament. I was sitting in class and was able to watch that whole game in its entirety, and just came away very impressed with Rose as kind of a future prospect, and then his ability to kind of handle the ball and create a little bit. But he's like this ideal kind of wing for the next level. Maybe some similarities to like a Pat McCaw. So Tulsa's other pieces too, I do like. Temple's other pieces like a LeVan Alston and J.P. Mormon and Devondre Perry. But we can talk more about Temple when it's their turn. But in terms of Tulsa, they were 12-6 in the American last year, but they were only 110th in KenPom. They were kind of a beneficiary, it seems like, of one of those unbalanced scheduling quirks where when you don't play the double round robin, the conference records are essentially meaningless because of the varying strength of schedules within the league. So I think that Tulsa certainly wasn't as good as that record indicated last year, and I think that they could kind of revert back to the mean this year.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a pretty 500 team to me. I don't think they don't really jump off the page in any regard. I think they've got some nice pieces. They just don't have a ton. I don't think this team really contends for an NCAA tournament berth, but I also, I think they'll be competitive. I think they'll be fine. I think Frank Haith teams are just generally fine at Tulsa. That's kind of been the MO. Anything else on the Golden Hurricanes before we move on to Memphis?
Nope. Let's move on here.
Yeah, I had a feeling we would have plenty of time to talk about Memphis, and we certainly need to, given kind of everything that's happened to the program since Tubby Smith departed in early March. Penny Hardaway taking over, injecting so much kind of life and confidence into this program. Memphis Madness the other day was just absolutely rocking. I believe that was a week ago today, actually. They filled up an NBA-sized arena and a sellout, selling $100 courtside seats for a preseason scrimmage of their own players. Like, the excitement about Memphis basketball is back. I don't know if it's necessarily warranted yet. I think Jeremiah Martin's really good. Tyvon Davenport, Kareem Bruton can play rotation minutes. And then you've got a pretty impressive freshman class of good long-term pieces. Guys like Antoine Jones, Tyler Harris, Alec Lomax, Ryan Boyce, and even David Wingett, who was a guy who didn't get a ton of recruiting buzz, but he's a guy who has really popped in practice from what's been kind of those practice reports. And they also bring in a JUCO and Isaiah Maurice, who comes in, originally started his career at Kansas State. So he brought the talent. Penny brought the talent level up to a point where they should be competitive, even to a point where they could contend, I think, for a title if everything breaks right, but I think it would take a lot.
Yeah. I like this Memphis team. I don't have them in the NCAA tournament. I have them kind of solidly in that middle of the NIT, that kind of 4 or 5 seed NIT range, but I like them to take a nice step up this year. I mean, Martin is obviously an excellent point guard, and I think that he could play a little with Alex Lomax and Tyler Harris and like dual point guard backups. The three of them can kind of dual point guard backcourts, and the two of them or the three of them can kind of rotate from that point guard to shooting guard spot. And then the front court also looks extremely solid. You went through the roster earlier, but veterans like Davenport and Thornton, and then at the center position, Parks and Isaiah Maurice. That's some solid depth, older, experienced guys who can contribute there. I think the one kind of question mark in terms of, well, I guess there are two question marks about the roster. I think that they could use like a 3-man who could really shoot the ball. I think Kareem Bruton's probably going to get the first crack at that 3-man spot. I think that they could use like a taller, maybe like a 6'6", 6'7", like 3-and-D type there. And then just the overall talent level in the roster where, Martin's obviously an excellent player and they have guys to kind of fill the different roles, but, to take that next step, they will want a talent upgrade.
Yeah, I think it's interesting going from Penny Hardaway from Tubby to Penny Hardaway. I mean, Tubby was a guy who got the most out of a roster that wasn't that talented. I mean, he did not recruit well at Memphis, and there were certainly factors at play beyond his control for that being the case. But he didn't recruit well, but he found enough guys that he could plug into his system that worked. Now you're going to a guy who's never been a D1 head coach, never been a D1 assistant coach in Penny Hardaway. Used to coaching by having a guy like a James Wiseman on his roster, or a guy like any of these guys that have come out of Memphis East in the past. And so I think it'll be a really interesting kind of divide for him. I don't know. I think people might be overrating the talent a little bit on this roster just because it played okay under Tubby, and guys like Davenport and Bruton might not be quite as good as they appear, which certainly will be an interesting storyline. And then just how does Penny Hardaway manage coaching as a whole? I mean, all the responsibilities of being a D1 college coach. I mean, he's passed every test so far, but being in season, having to recruit, having to, appease boosters, having to manage minutes, and he hired a staff that's going to recruit really well, but with the exception of Tony Madlock, isn't exceptionally experienced on the college bench either. So I think that's something to watch. I have them fourth. I think they could win the league. I truly do. I wouldn't be floored if that occurred, but I have them fourth to start out.
I have them fifth. I have them right in the middle of the pack. Fifth in the AAC and 61st nationally. I think it is worth pointing out that they had a solid record last year, but they finished in the 160s in KenPom. So I mean, this was not a good team despite the record. I know a lot of people were very upset when Tubby Smith got hired. Like, oh, what more do you want him to do? I mean, 160th is not going to cut it at a program like Memphis, nor should it. And then in terms of just the overall talent level, next year when you have guys like Lomax, Harris, and Jones becoming sophomores, and then all the top talent that Memphis is currently involved with, I think the talent level is certainly going to raise very quickly. I know that they're in the mix for Trenton Watford at that 4 spot. Obviously, James Wiseman at the 5, and then they're kind of involvement with the other positions are less clear at this point. I did see that they got a crystal ball pick for a Precious Achua recently, so that would be quite a 3-man class if they got Achua, Watford, and Wiseman.
Oh my! I mean, Penny's going to recruit. I don't think there's any real doubt in my mind that Penny Hardaway is going to get players. It's just going to be a matter of how does he coach them, and he certainly passed the early tests. Do you don't think this is an NCAA tournament team, but you wouldn't be surprised? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
I think I would be surprised if they were an NCAA tournament team. They're the team that I feel has the most narrow range in the top 8. I see them being 4, 5, or 6.
All right, there you have it. I think I'm a little more in on the talent than you are, even though I kind of brought up the point that would suggest I'm not. Humorously enough, I do. I think things could happen. I think especially if Penny can really get the magic back about that program. I think there's something underrated about just chemistry and excitement around a program that hasn't had that for a little bit. So let's move on to UCF. My pick to win the league as of now. 19-13, 9-9 last season in the conference. They were very mediocre, great defensively, an absolute train wreck on offense. But that was in no small part to B.J. Taylor being hurt for much of the season, Taco Fall having an injury, and then Aubrey Dawkins, who was expected to really come in as a transfer from Michigan and make a huge impact, and he was hurt all of last season. He's going to give that offense a massive boost. They still have guys like Deion Griffin and Terrell Allen in the backcourt who can rotate in. So they're going to be good on defense with Taco anchoring things, and Aubrey Dawkins on the perimeter is a really good defender. It's just going to be a matter of can they put the ball in the basket and can Johnny Dawkins coach. And I'm buying the hype, but I'm not all that confident in that pick. I will say that.
Well, I'm also buying the hype. I have UCF winning it all being the AAC. And I think that this is the most talented team in the league by a pretty wide margin. I mean, they have this great mix of talent and experience with a B.J. Taylor and then Taco Fall, who are both seniors, and then Aubrey Dawkins, who, with his injuries and transferring, it's unclear, what is he, a junior or senior, but he's an excellent player who I think is being a little overshadowed by the people, or he's being a little overlooked from the people who are not high on Central Florida because of his stats at Michigan. But I mean, he was stuck behind some pretty serious players, whether it be Zach Irvin, Glenn Robinson, Nick Stauskas, Muhammad Ali Rockman. I mean, they had some really good wing players during that time, and I think that this transfer really is going to let Dawkins blossom if he's fully healthy. It's a shame that their whole big three got hurt last year because I think if AJ Davis were on this team this year, this would be a lock for the top 25. I think he is kind of the missing piece for them. And we mentioned it time and time again, but they could really use that 3-4 type who can play at that power forward position who's either a good athlete or a good shooter. Davis being the good athlete. So I think that's kind of the one spot that this UCF team is missing.
Yeah, I would tend to agree there. I will be interested to see what Colin Smith can do, the transfer in from George Washington. He's a guy who I think has a chance to be an low-key impact transfer. He only averaged 5 points and 4 boards at GW, but he spaced the floor a little bit. Showed a little bit of ability to shoot the ball. So maybe he's a guy at 6'10" who could step out, hit some jump shots. If he can switch defensively, that'd be pretty big as well. I don't remember watching him a ton, but the stat profile is intriguing.
I believe he was a starter as a freshman too, at least for part of the season. So that's kind of a promising. I mean, freshman big men have steeper learning curves, and for him to have starting experience and to have played those minutes at George Washington is definitely a big plus. Do you think that he plays any with Taco Fall? I know I mentioned earlier that they could use a stable presence at power forward. Do you think that that's an option?
I think it is. I don't think UCF's a team that's going to need to play, spaced out and make sure we have enough guards on the floor to keep the spacing good. Like, they're going to play rock fights with teams. Like, it's going to be a battle. So I think they can go a little bigger. Play Smith as a 4, especially if he can step out and hit some threes. I think we'd see that lineup for maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes a night.
Absolutely. And then any other guys that you're kind of high on for this Central Florida team?
Not particularly. I'm pretty indifferent on a lot of like the depth pieces on this roster, like Deion Griffin and Terrell Allen. I think they're like fine players, nothing special. I really just love their big three. I think Aubrey Dawkins is like a 14-point a game on 40% shooting player, which is just hugely valuable for a team that really couldn't put the ball in the basket last year. So that's most of my reasoning for excitement, plus hopeful health of BJ Taylor and Taco Fall.
Those are my exact same reasons as well. And in terms of the composite ranking, I believe UCF was ranked by one person. I will find that now. They have a 23rd place vote from Andy Katz, and that is too high, but I like it more than some of the teams that got votes. I think if this were last year, I think I would be all in on throwing UCF a top 25 vote. This year, I think it might be a touch too high, but I do like the optimism. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. I don't really have much more to add. Let's move on to Temple. We touched on Temple a little bit earlier. It was a disappointing season last year after a blazing start at, I believe it was the Charleston Classic. They went 17-16 on the season overall, though 8-10 in the AAC. Quentin Rose was impressive, 15 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. He's, as you said, kind of that big, long initiator type who can play either on or off the ball. They also bring back Shiz Alston, who was pretty solid last season, 13-3-3. But they lose Obi Anechionia, who is really their only consistent big man. They do still have Ernest Aflakpi. And then they also lose Josh Brown, who is that just kind of a versatile guard who could play on or off the ball. They bring back a pair of intriguing wings in Devondre Perry and JP Mormon, who I think really that's where the upside in this team is. If those two guys can break out, the front court's thin. They don't have a lot of depth, but I think if those guys can break out, this team could make some noise.
Yep, and this is a position that we talked about numerous times as teams were missing that type of player, and Temple has 2 of them in Perry and in Mormon, those like combo forwards. I think that this Temple team's depth is okay. I think a top 9 of, there are starters, and then like Alani Moore, either Mormon or Perry, whoever doesn't start. Damian Moore, who was in the rotation last year at the center position. And then Quentin Jackson's a guy who I'm very intrigued by, combo guard. He's someone who, out of high school, his final 3 was Charlotte, Cincinnati, and Providence. A lot of people thought it was going to be between Cincinnati and Providence, and almost directly after he cut his list of 3, he committed to Charlotte, which which shocked many people. I know Providence really wanted him as their point guard in the class of 2016 after they missed on Temple Gibbs. That's a story for another podcast. But I like his upside. He's a very long and athletic guard. I think that gives them another ball handler. They could play a Alston Rose and Jackson look, which would be very, very long and athletic on the perimeter.
Yeah, no, it's an intriguing lineup, and Jackson is an intriguing player. His JUCO numbers weren't all that impressive. He averaged 10 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists on 44% shooting and 27% from three, actually 28%, excuse me. So, I mean, if he's not really going to space the floor as a combo guard, he's only going to shoot that 28%. I don't love giving him huge minutes, especially given he hit only 16 threes all season in 28 games. So the shooting definitely might be something that holds him back a little bit, but a fairly well-regarded JUCO prospect. So definitely one I'll be keeping my eye on.
Yeah, he's not a shooter. He's that like big athletic guard kind of archetype. And then I think another key to this team could be the play of Pierre-Louis and Alani Moore. Pretty sure that the two kind of flip-flopped in terms of being the starter and the reserve last year. It'll be interesting to see if one of the two can emerge as the clear starter, similar to the battle between Perry and Mormon at power forward.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree there. I think Moore is pretty interesting. I think he could be a nice piece. He was a guy I was pretty excited about going into last season. Just didn't quite do it for me, if you will, last season. So we'll see if he can break out. I think they need one of those two guys to step up in the backcourt with Jackson and Alston and Rose.
So then I was surprised to hear that you're not super high on this Temple team. I've seen a lot of people have them in that 7 to 8 range. Myself, I have them 4th, which puts them 56th nationally, which is about a 3 seed in the NIT.
Yeah, I guess I got a little bit gun shy, given how last year they just disappointed me every time I started to get optimistic about them. So that's kind of where I am. I think there's also kind of this weird aura hanging over the program of Fran Dunphy's last year with the replacement already in tow and Aaron Mackey. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think they'll try to win one for Fran to end the season, but they really haven't done it. Fran really hasn't done it for me in the last several years. So I'll take a cautious approach with this Al's team.
Yeah, and I think that the last time that they were in the NCAA tournament, that was when they played Iowa in the first round, right? And like both teams were like tanking down the stretch, and then they got to play each other in the first round. I remember being very, very upset about that because those were two teams I was planning on picking against in my bracket there.
That game was, if I recall, not exciting to watch.
Adam Woodbury tip-in, I think, right?
Oh, man, I loved Adam Woodbury. He was the man.
I loved Aaron White.
Yeah, no, I loved a lot of. I loved Mike Gasell. Like, I loved that whole Iowa team, mostly because I was still kind of a fan because I was rooting for Fran McCaffrey, just because coming from Siena and such. But that man, oh man, those teams had some fun guys.
All right, so then moving on, right?
Next, yes, indeed. UConn.
Who's next, SMU?
What was that?
So who's next? SMU.
UConn.
Oh, geez, SMU. Talk about a roller coaster seasons with Temple, SMU, Oklahoma, Arizona State.
Yeah. Jeez. SMU really fell off. They were actually 6-12. UConn went 7-11 in the conference. They've replaced Kevin Ollie. They're still kind of litigating that out in the courtrooms in terms of what they'll end up owing him. But they got their man in Dan Hurley, and Hurley will have a backcourt that he can really rely on from the get-go. Guys that fit what he wants to do with Jalen Adams, Christian Vital. They bring in they bring in Terrence Smith from Duquesne, who should be a nice rotation piece in that backcourt. Also, they add Brendan Adams, who's the Jalen who went to St. Bonaventure's brother. I know that is very confusing. But Jalen Adams, who went to St. Bonaventure's brother, Brendan, follows Dan Hurley from URI as a signee in this class. And they also get Alfred Gilbert back from injury. At least they hope. He's been hurt the last 2 seasons, so we'll see what happens there. but massive questions in the front court to solve beyond Josh Carlton, who is perhaps the most perhaps is the most hyped up 4-point and 3-rebound big man I've ever seen.
No, I mean the UConn fan base is very high on it seems like two players, being Jalen Adams, they're a consistent senior, and then Josh Carlton. I went on their message board because I was trying to see, what kind of pulse the fans had on who would start at power forward. And there was a starting lineup thread. About 100 different starting lineups were thrown out there by people. Everyone had Adams and Carlton. Those are the only two players to be in every starting lineup. Every player except for Brendan Adams and Quentin Williams were in it. Well, we're in one. That's like 10 or 11 different guys that at least one fan thinks will start. Personally, I think that Altuve Gilbert and Christian Vital are the clear backcourt mates of Jalen Adams. So the three of them will be the 1, 2, and 3. Carlton at the 5, and then starting lineup at the 4. That's a tough one. I think it comes down to Tyler Polley or Sidney Wilson. I don't know if Wilson has enough size there, but I think I'll go with Wilson as my early pick there.
I wouldn't be surprised if they were to go with Terrence Smith in the backcourt over Altuve Gilbert, and let Gilbert kind of get his footing off the bench at least early in the season and be that kind of scoring guard in that role. And then that 4 spot is a big question mark for me. I can't imagine they'd play two true bigs and play like a Kasum Yakwe and Josh Carlton front court. I think that'd be pretty ugly. I know I even saw like a mention of Eric Cobb playing the 4. I got a message from a UConn fan that was like, Eric Cobb is actually a shooter and a very good passer. He was just he was reined in too much by Kevin Ollie, and I was like, Eric Cobb shot 1 for 17 from 3 in junior college. He is not a shooter in any way, shape, or capacity. But if they want to play him with the 4, that's great. I mean, he can't defend, nor can he shoot the ball, so that'd be a bit of a mistake. I think they go small, play Sidney Wilson at the 4. Although, as much as people talk about Dan Hurley being a guards coach and wanting to play small, they did spend a lot of time in 2 big lineups last year and in years past. So wouldn't surprise me if they wind up playing a guy like a Whaley or Pauly who can at least stretch the floor a little bit at that 4 spot over Sid Wilson.
Yeah, I don't see how playing a 2 big lineup would be anything that the fans would want to see, given the bigs that they have. It seems like they have a bunch of bigs. It seems like it's that Kevin Ollie was basically just like throwing guys up, throwing darts, trying, let's fill the back end of this roster with 6 or 7 big men and see who sticks. And I think the results were mostly inconclusive through 1 year. I think Carlton's definitely a keeper. The UConn fans may be a little higher on him than they should be, but I think he's a legitimately very good player, or at least very good prospect who will become an excellent center in a couple of years. And I've also seen some optimism for Yakwe, but I mean he was good as a freshman at St. John's, and he just fell off a cliff where last year, I mean, he wasn't even playing most of the time on a team that was starved for depth.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm not big on Yakwe. What do you make of this UConn team? I'm trying to remember. I believe I have them 6th. Yes, I do have them 6th. I think Jalen's going to be really good, maybe win the Player of the Year in the league. But the front court's going to have some trouble. And, I mean, you're betting a lot in Altuve Gilbert getting healthy. It's one of those things where, like, they hurt the backcourt depth by over recruiting big men who aren't necessarily like playable, as you mentioned. I think Gilbert and Sid Wilson are the keys to this team, along with obviously Adams playing up to the level that they expect him to.
Yeah, I think another kind of ramification of kind of their roster construction was, right, so you have Jalen Adams and you have Altuve Gilbert. but Gilbert was hurt, so naturally you want to add another guard. But what good guard is going to come in when, if Gilbert's healthy, Gilbert's going to play over, whatever good freshman guard that they bring in. And then Adams, isn't going to give up any minutes. I was surprised to see Terrence Smith, join UConn, because if Gilbert's healthy and then they have Adams and Vital, I mean, he could have presumably played a bigger role at a comparable program that could maybe, had a bigger need in the backcourt. So when you have guys that are as highly touted as the guards that they have, it's hard to get guys to come in behind them without like a projectable path to a playing time. And the fact that UConn hasn't been winning lately also kind of hurts their chances of doing that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So where do you have UConn?
I'm 6th as well.
Okay.
So right behind Memphis in that kind of middle NIT.
Yeah, no, I agree there. Let's move on to SMU. SMU really fell off a cliff last season after a very promising start. Part of that was due to injury. Shake Milton wasn't healthy at times. Jerry Foster got hurt. He was a super important player. And this wasn't a deep team to begin with. They were only going to play about 8. And so Milton's gone to the pro ranks. Ben Emologu is also gone. But they bring back Jimmy Witt, who's this kind of jack of all trades, kind of combo wing who can't shoot it. Jamal McMurray, who's that like undersized combo who can score. And then Ethan Chargois, who is a stretch big who came out guns blazing to start the season and then really cooled off down the stretch, along with Jerry Foster. And then they bring in a fairly solid recruiting class. I don't know if there's any like massive newcomers. I think that's one of the themes around the league is I don't think they've recruited all that well this year. I don't see like a lot of newcomers that I'm just incredibly excited about. They have a couple of 3-stars coming in Ferran Hunt and Jamar Young. Both have kind of interesting long-term potential, but I don't expect to make big impacts right away.
Yeah, this is the last team that we're going to talk about in what I call that top 8. And they're a team that I had higher up earlier on in the offseason. And as we kind of went in the more I kind of analyzed this roster, the less I liked it. I mean, Foster isn't even cleared yet, I don't think, to play. And I mean, the season is coming in like 20-something days. Jimmy Witt is like an interesting piece. I just don't love his fit in the backcourt with Jamal McMurray, who was kind of a, more of like a gunner type, more of like a 6th man type. He's probably going to be the starting point guard. And speaking of point guard depth, losing Elijah Landrum, they don't really have a ton of ball handlers now. They look a little short in that category. I like some of their individual pieces, like Nat Dixon, Isaiah Mike, and then you mentioned Chargoy too. But I think that this team is just missing a high-level point guard, and I think that's a big enough kind of concern where I'm slotting SMU in that 7 spot in the AAC.
Yeah, so I have them 5th. I'm kind of okay with them not having a true point guard. Maybe it's just because I'm doing the same thing I'm doing to Northwestern. But it's like Jerry Foster, McMurray, and Witt can all handle the ball. They'll probably share the floor a ton. Nat Dixon is a good shooter, so he can be that 4th guard in the backcourt, and then maybe Ferran Hunt find some minutes. And then you'll have Chargoy and Isaiah Mike, both kind of factoring in the front court. I don't love the fact they don't really have a rim protector. I certainly don't love this roster. I don't think the depth is great. But it's, I mean, I think there's intrigue to having all these kind of combo guys who can handle the ball, make a few plays, but aren't necessarily point guards.
Yeah, I think that the Shake Milton loss is just so huge, just because that kind of coincided with where the wheels fell off last season. I know that Foster was hurt during that time as well, but Milton was seemingly the straw who broke the camel's back, and they didn't really get a suitable replacement for him in that area. That's why I'm kind of low on them. I would not be surprised if they finished 8th in this top 8, but I would be surprised if they finish any lower than 8th.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Let us move on to the bottom 3 of this conference that should remain the bottom 3 this year. Tulane probably has the best chance of moving up. They had some promising moments early in the season last year, fell off down the stretch. They lose Melvin Frazier and Cam Reynolds to the pro ranks. Reynolds was gone anyway, but Frazier leaving early, certainly a bit of a blow, although he was a clear NBA draft prospect. So hard to criticize, really. That said, they do bring back a pretty strong little roster core. Jordan Cornish and Rayana Embo in the backcourt, along with Samir Sahik, the Vanderbilt transfer, up front. And they bring in a pretty impressive recruiting class as well. Headlined by Connor Crabtree, who Memphis wanted late, but couldn't sway him. He's an underrated recruit. And then Kevin Zhang and Moses Wood are also wings. Zhang went to Montverde. He's a very impressive prospect with some nice long-term upside. They also have Jordan Walker sitting out this season from Seton Hall, so he'll be an interesting piece long-term. I still do believe in Mike Dunleavy. I was so down on the hire last year going into the season, and then he showed me some stuff last year. And he's starting to recruit at a little higher level. I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe made some strides this year and snuck up a couple spots, even though they lose those 2 top players.
I mean, it is a big deal when a tournament caliber team loses a guy to unexpected early entry. When a program like Tulane loses their best player to unexpected early entry, I mean that's a death blow. I mean, this team is going to be hurting. I've seen a lot of good things about Ray Ona Embo, excuse the potential mispronunciation there, but I've seen some people suggest that he could maybe take a step up and become a bit of a prospect in his own right. Then maybe Tulane's an interesting watch, but I just don't think that there's anything here that suggests that they would be relevant in terms of like a national perspective.
Yeah, no, I would not imagine that either. It's one of those things when you're doing a rebuilding job like this, you need several classes in a row to have like more hits than misses. This class looks good on paper. We'll see if it can find a way. I mean, I think this is a great year though, for them to kind of work out. I mean, they only lose Cornish after this year, so get guys like Crabtree and Zhang ready if they're the future of your program, and then hopefully gear up to make a big run up the standings the following year with Ana Embo and Sahik back for one more year, as well as Jordan Walker.
So who's next? Is it East Carolina or South Florida?
It is East Carolina. Yes, East Carolina. 4-14 versus South Florida's 3-13. East Carolina was pretty much a train wreck last year. Fired Jeff LeBeau, or I believe he actually walked away on his own, but was not going to have a job at the end of the season. They hired Joe Dooley back, which I kind of liked, especially given the staff that he put together. He hired Steve Rockefort, who is an assistant at Virginia Tech, and Rap Chilius, who is at UConn, who recruited Markelle Fultz to Washington, 2 just absolute powerhouse recruiters who will help them get players in an area where it's so tough because of the kind of always being the 4th fiddle in town behind Duke, UNC, and NC State. They've done a nice job with some long-term recruiting. They landed Tyree Jackson from junior college. He'll come next year. And then they signed a pretty big freshman class this year, headlined by Tyler Foster, who was committed to Georgetown for a really long time and then decommitted, wound up going to prep school at Mount Zion. His recruiting was really quiet, and then he pops up out of nowhere and pops to East Carolina after the coaching change. So he'll be an interesting piece. They also bring back Isaac Fleming, who is a nice player. for them last season, 12 points and 5 assists, along with Sean Williams, who's that undersized combo guard type. And then they also get Seth Leday into the program. He had a redshirt last year as a transfer from junior college. So he's a guy who could originally from junior college, went up at Virginia Tech, then transferred, sat out last year. He's an intriguing piece for this program as well. So I don't think they move up much. I think they stay in that 11 spot. But I mean, I think the future is brighter than it would have been under LeBeau.
Yeah, I think Dooley is a great hire here. I mean, they were 307th in KenPom last year. I mean, say what you want about metrics, KenPom, rankings, whatever. If you're 300 and something in the country, you are not a good team. Interesting note, though, on Pig Jackson. When I wrote my Virginia Tech preview last year, I said, that he was going to be out of the rotation. And Virginia Tech fans were saying, if Pig Jackson is out of the rotation, we're in a lot of trouble. And I was like what? Like, this guy's clearly like your 11th or 12th man. Like, why would you be any, who cares? I mean, he's not, he has no bearing on your season. And look, he transfers out and the program is still here. We're still standing in Blacksburg.
Yes, he follows Rocafort to East Carolina, and they also offered Kadeem Sy. So I wonder if it's possible that they will mind up making a reunion as well at that program. So definitely something to monitor with those guys getting their players back into the program. Another thing I was kind of watching was like, could Rap Chilius take Quentin Williams, who's acting like a senior this year at UConn, even though he's a redshirt junior? Could he take him as a grad transfer next year? So it'll be interesting to see if Joe Dooley can get players from that perspective. That's going to be the biggest thing. Can he get American level players at ECU, which is a program I think a lot of people see as a mid-major, even though they're in a high major league?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the dynamics at ECU as to why they recruit at such a lower level. I mean, even teams that are, typically in the bottom of these good leagues can recruit better than ECU does. I mean, it's a nice campus, I think, right? They have a good baseball and football team, right? I don't know why basketball falls so behind, but it's really not too big of a national impact. The NCAA tournament will go on whether East Carolina is good or not.
Very, very fair. Let's wrap this thing up with South Florida before we do down our standings and our all conference teams. USF in year one of Brian Gregory didn't really make too much of a strides. They went heavy on 2 grad transfers in Stephon Jiggets and Peyton Banks. Came from Fairleigh Dickinson and Penn State, respectively. But the big kind of breakthrough guy last year was David Collins, a freshman out of First Love Christian Academy, who was a recruit I was watching out of high school, just because he was playing with Prince Oduro, who's a Siena commit. So I was watching a lot of film of him. I really liked Collins. I thought he was going to be a really good player, and he proved it right so far. Average 10, 2.5, and 2.5. But this team pretty much loses everything else. They lose Tulio Da Silva, who was a nice kind of a nice long-term piece for them as a sophomore. Malik Martin leaves early as well. So this is kind of like a year one again in year 2 for Brian Gregory. He signs a pretty solid incoming class with 4 3-star recruits per 24/7. Just pulling that up now. Xavier Castaneda is a point guard out of Whitney Young in Chicago, who I've heard a lot of good things about. Also they get Madut Achek, who was 262 in the composite as well, out of Victory Rock Prep. So there's some talent in this incoming group, but I mean, I wrote in my written preview, when you're rebuilding a program like this, you just need to have 2 or 3 classes in a row with more hits than misses. You have your one foundational piece in David Collins. You just need 2 or 3 hits in this upcoming class to start to make any sort of run momentum-wise.
Yeah, I think that they're on the right track. They need some of these JUCO/transfer guys to really hit. And I mean, if you can keep guys in the program and get these transfers to hit, I mean, you can really get the ball rolling. I love when you're in a deep rebuild to go after transfers. That's the easiest and most effective way, because you have some data on these guys in terms of how they perform at the Division I level. Easier. I mean, their recruiting timelines are also shorter because they only have a couple months to make a decision. That's a very good way to move forward. I like two of the transfers that they have for this year, LaQuincy Rideau and TJ Lang. And for next year, they have some. They have Zach Dawson and Mayan Kier, who are also a pair of transfers, former top 150 recruits. So the program's in good shape, but it's too bad that Brian Gregory is going to leave to coach Michigan State once Tom Izzo retires.
Yeah, no, Brian Gregory is guaranteed that job. I can't imagine.
No, he was fourth in line.
Absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, I do think Rideau is actually going to be really good this season. I'm excited to watch him, just because he was like a super high steal guy last year, or 2 years ago at Gardner Webb. He's very athletic. I think he could be one of those guys who's a really nice season in a rebuilding year. It'd be nice to see Gregory take a step forward with this group. I was never a big fan of the hire to begin with, so maybe that's kind of clouding it, but I just didn't see much in year one.
No, I wasn't big on the hire either. And for people to get the reference we just made, if you didn't get it, CBSSports.com series of which coaches or who's going to replace these aging Hall of Fame coaches. And for Michigan State, one of the candidates was Brian Gregory, who's been he was run out of Georgia Tech, inexplicably gets this job after there was like no interest in it. And I mean, maybe they're heading in the right direction. They still got to make some major strides. They were also in the 270s or 280s in KenPom last year. So there is a long way to go. A lot of people, saying with the Rutgers rebuild that it was such a massive rebuild, this is equally, if not more, daunting.
I will say I have about as good a chance of getting the Michigan State head coaching job as Brian Gregory does.
I would agree.
That's how I'll end my bit on the South Florida Bowls. Let's run through those conference standings. Brad, why don't you take it away first as to what you have? And we've kind of touched on them each in real time, but as we like to do, run them down before we wrap things up.
So I have 1 Central Florida, 2 Cincinnati, 3 Houston, 4 Temple, 5 Memphis, 6 UConn, 7 SMU, 8 Wichita State. All those teams span from, in terms of national rankings, between 40 and 79. That's a very tight range of this top 8. And then I have Tulsa, Tulane, South Florida, East Carolina, finishing out that bottom 4.
And for me, I've got UCF number 1, Houston at 2, Cincy at 3. So we have the same top 3, although in different orders. We flop 2 and 3. Then I have Memphis at 4, SMU at 5, UConn at 6, Wichita at 7, Temple at 8. So that's the biggest divergence between us is I have Temple all the way down to 8, Tulsa at 9, Tulane at 10, East Carolina at 11, and South Florida at 12. And then our all conference teams and our first team and our player of the year, I have Jalen Adams, Quentin Rose, Jeremiah Martin, Jerry Foster, and Jerron Cumberland is my first team. And I went with player of the year, Jalen Adams.
Yep. So mine is Jerron Cumberland, BJ Taylor, Quentin Rose, and Jalen Adams. And for the 5th spot, tough call. I went with Taco Fall. A lot of people think he's a gimmick player, 7'6", but I mean he's a real defensive anchor. And if UCF wins the league, I could see them potentially, getting recognition for their extremely strong defense led by Taco Fall. Player of the year, I went with BJ Taylor, but upon second thought, I may switch to Cumberland.
Yeah, I ditched BJ Taylor just because of the health. I will just say that he wasn't on my first team just because he hasn't really been healthy the last 2 seasons. If he's healthy, he's a surefire first teamer. I just wanted to kind of hedge there. And then I had my newcomer of the year, Aubrey Dawkins, breakout player Keith Williams, and the number of bids and who gets those bids. Brad, what do you think?
So this is going to sound strange, but if all the stars broke right, there are 8 teams that could get a bid. Right now, the odds of the AAC getting 8 bids is minuscule. But I think any one of the top 8 if you had them, in the back of your tournament projection, I wouldn't call you crazy. That means, if the stars align, I guess the max is 8. I think a more realistic max would be like 5. I have 3 right now, being Central Florida, Cincy, and Houston. But on the flip side, having 1 is also a legitimate possibility.
Yeah, I think I'll have 3 in the same 3 as you, UCF, Houston, and Cincy. I think Memphis and UConn are kind of lurking just because they have the talent. But yeah, I think it's 3. 5 feels not unrealistic. But the thing is, I don't see one of these teams being more than like an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. I don't see a top 5 seed at all in this group, which is kind of just the weird kind of quirk of how this league is made up this year. Just a ton, as you said, between 40 and 79, just so tight.
Yeah, because I have UCF first and 40th, which puts them as a 10 seed. So I mean, that kind of speaks to this massive, cluster in the middle, which I think makes this league super interesting. A league that I'll be following very closely because there could be bubble games. I mean, there's so many chances for bubble games, which could give these teams more chances at quality wins. It kind of replicate the opportunities of like a true high major league where in the Big 12 you can play a top 35 team almost every night. In the AAC, you can play a top 75 team almost every night. And if that's on the road, that's a quadrant 1 game.
That is an excellent point that teams could actually rack up a lot of quadrant 1 wins that aren't necessarily like your typical quadrant 1 win. Kind of brings us back to the whole discussion of like, when Jay Billis was like, why do we value a win at home over Duke the same we do as a road win at Rider? I was like, we don't. Obviously, a win over Duke is more impressive than a win at Rider, but just for a counting number statistic, we do that. So there's going to be a chance for a lot of those teams to snag into the back end of that 75 and be NET beneficiaries because the RPI is defunct.
Yeah, so Jay Billis says that, the Duke and the Rider comparison, but then when Middle Tennessee State's on the bubble, it's like, they don't get credit for these road wins. These are tough road wins. Yeah. Yeah, but both ways. So in one instance, these mid-major road wins are meaningless, and on the other hand, they're just as hard as what the high major teams are doing. Drives me insane.
Yeah, Jay Billis just generally drives me insane. I really enjoyed Doug Gottlieb's tweet today. I'm trying to pull it up right now because I really just thought it was absolutely hilarious. Just the roast he went in on Jay Billis. He said, and I quote, Jay Billis saying Adidas paying kids to attend schools is normal commerce. This is not true. Under the table payments in any business to secure contracts is not normal nor legal commerce. In quotes. I was like, yeah, I mean, I think Billis is one of those guys who constantly changes what he says just to fit a narrative that he has decided in his head is the right narrative to be on. So if it's something that fits paying players, he just he'll find a way for it to work. And if it's something criticizes the NCAA, the RPI, the NET or whatever, he'll find a way that it fits his narrative. And when it's making a team that he wants to look good, he'll make sure it fits what he wants to say. I don't think he actually has opinions.
Yeah, it's all circular logic. You make one point and then he changes the target, right? And then it's just one big circle where he just he's just a big pretzel that just turns wherever the time calls for there.
I think we should wrap up this podcast by Brad calling Jay Billis pretzel and just leave it at that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you're listening. We do appreciate it. It helps others find the show. Keep tuning in. We'll have more conference previews coming your way. Hopefully this weekend, or at least early next week, because we've got less than a month of the season. We're going to wrap all those previews up. Maybe get on one more podcast that's not a conference preview before the season, so we can just kind of just talk some things we're excited about, maybe preview the first week of games. So it's all coming up. We're all very excited about it. Big Ten Media Days were today. I was unfortunately unable to attend, but it didn't seem all that exciting what I missed. So, but Media Day is always kind of the indication of the start of the season. So too bad I missed it. Once again, thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you all have a great night.